Hi, I'm Stephen Bowie. This is the Archive of American Television interview with Ellen M. Violett. Today is December 13th, 2008, and we're doing this in New York City. Can you tell us your name at birth?
Ellen McCarter Violett, and I was born on April 7th, 1925.
Okay, where were you born?
I was born in the Women's Hospital in New York on 110th Street.
Okay. Did you grow up in New York?
No, in New Jersey for the first 7 years of my life, and then after that my parents divorced and I lived in Long Island.
Did you have a nickname as a child? Did you have a nickname as a child?
Yes, and I still have it. I named myself. There was great fumbling around about christening me, and I didn't know that, but I had a doll that was called a pup doll, and I fell in love with it, and unless they addressed the doll, I wouldn't talk to them, and so that became my name. And it still is almost everywhere but in television studios, where people would get on the intercom and yell Ellen, and I'd just sit there and then remember.
And were you credited a certain way on screen?
Ellen M. Violett, but I didn't stick the M in until the 60s.
What was your father's name, and what did he do?
Atwood Violett. He was an insurance man, and I'm writing a memoir about that whole area of my life. Much more than I wrote. And there were no writers in the immediate family at that time. And well, that's all I can tell you.
Okay. Can we get your mother's name at least?
My mother's name was Ellen McCarter Violett then, and then she became Ellen McCarter Doubleday. She married a publisher by the name of Nelson Doubleday.
Okay. I'm sorry, can we stop for a second? I just want to ask, what traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
It would really depend who my parents turned out to be, but if they are as advertised, I inherited from my father, certainly, or both sides of the family, actually, alcoholism, which ran in the family, all the siblings got it, and a certain, it's hard to say, but I guess an attitude towards life. I admired Atwood Violett and adored my mother. And then everybody remarried, and one stumbled on.
And can you say who your stepfather was?
Nelson Doubleday.
The publisher?
Yes.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes. I have one. Madeline Violett was older than I. She was an artist. She's dead. She married 3 times, and her last husband was Peter Martin, who helped Phil and Getty start the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco, and then they had the New Yorker bookstore here. And my younger siblings are Nelson Doubleday Jr., who was also a publisher and owned the Mets and retired, and my younger sister, Neltje, Neltje, who has discarded all her names but that name. She has discarded 2 husbands' worth of names and the Doubleday, and she is a pioneer lady that lives in Wyoming. She's an artist. Both sisters were artists. And she runs like a yotto called Gentile, which is an anagram of her name. And we're very close. And I'm close to her children.
When you were growing up, what did you want to be?
An actor, I think, a performer on stage, between, like doing what I'm doing now, getting a lot of attention that way. uh, it became my way of doing that, of being on stage, was to write for the stage. But that was obviously from the word go. I've run into this in this memoir. I hadn't really thought about it before. But it was a very clear attempt on the part of this child that named itself for a doll to get attention in odd ways. And or at least not be a conventional society kid, which is what was looming ahead if I'd stayed where I was.
When you were a kid, did you watch a lot of movies, listen to the radio?
Yes. I mean, I think that the radio and the movies were really what made my generation think they were stage struck. The generation before us would go all over the country because the stars toured, and they would see them, and they would say, Guthrie McClintock, when I worked with him and Catherine Cornell on a television show, would tell me about how he was in the third balcony and he saw whoever he saw. And then she toured, and that was gone by the time I was a child. What was the great thing to do was to go to the movies. And if you were sick, listen to the radio. Those soap operas ran all day on 15-minute intervals. And reading. Reading was the great escape of all.
Where did you go to high school?
My what?
Where did you go to high school?
I went to so many high schools, it's hard to tell you, but I went to boarding school at 10, and then I got right away into the drama department. And then high school, I went to another boarding school, and then to a school in New York, and finally college at Barnard.
What did you study at Barnard?
Playwriting. I was a playwriting major. You could major in playwriting then. And in my class, there were a lot of very good actresses. And any hope I'd had of being one, which I was fine at 16 in some boarding school, but by the time we got to college, no. Leora Dana, who went to Broadway, Peggy Fury, who became a huge coach on the coast, and an actress, and Barbara Schultz, who became one of my producers in television, and Jenny Howard, who was the daughter of Sidney Howard, a playwright, who also went on the stage. They were all in the same drama club that I was, and in playwriting class. They couldn't write their names, but they certainly could act. And so that became my thing, because I loved doing it. And it was a wonderful, the stage attracted me, because for one thing, it wasn't publishing in books. So it was someplace to go away, which I was anxious to do.
Was there a particularly influential teacher that you had?
Yes, Mina Latham. They named the playhouse for her. The Mina Latham Playhouse is now named for her. And she was marvelous, and she told us, she kept us from using words. We had to use pantomime, then improvisation, and then finally you could use scripts. People are walking around with scripts. But it certainly did teach me that reading a play off a piece of paper is not the way to go.
Okay. You mentioned that reading was very important to you as a child. Who were the writers that you grew up under the influence?
Well, I grew up on Slovenly Peter and Black Beauty, and sat right down and tried to write a story about a horse in the first person. But real writers, I think Morm was a huge influence. I found him very sympathetic. I loved war. I did not like what I used to call the sensitive girl writers. I came to like them, but I didn't like them when I was very young. I liked action, and I really liked British writers very much. But I met Morm later, and he was fascinating to me. And also he was a playwright on the side. Noel Coward, and my favorite playwright for a long time was Shaw. They were all very dialogue-driven, all of them.
Were there other writers like Mom that you met through your family?
Oh, God, yes. I met them all. Edna Ferber was a terrific star. Daphne du Maurier. And people would say to me later, when I got into television, what about the fact that you were the only woman for so long, and what didn't you get in trouble over that? And I thought, when I first went into it, it never occurred to me that women shouldn't be writers, since Edna Ferber was a holy terror. I mean, strong men paled when she was coming for the weekend. And at one point, there was another writer, Clemence Dane, who came first and gave us these stuffed dogs, Madeline and me. And then Edna Ferber came the next weekend, and we were sick for some reason. She came in and sat down, said, "Where did you get that lovely stuffed animal?" And I said, "Clemence Dane gave it to me." So at that point, she sat down and said, "Little girl, what would you like?" So I told her what I would like. I would like a football pants to go with my football helmet, so I could play football with my little brother. Or what? I guess he wasn't around yet. I don't know.
And after Barnard, did you continue studying acting, playwriting?
I studied with Stella Adler. I studied acting because I thought playwrights should know about it. I had no idea of being an actress anymore. And I worked on Theatre Arts Magazine, which was the best job I ever had, except for writing. And I also I was in the actor studio playwriting course with Harold Clurman, who was very exciting critic and had a marvelous sense of that something wasn't the greatest hit of the century. It was, as he'd say, probably the best play on the north side of 48th Street, east of Broadway. You know, he made you think in terms of culture, of overall, of the drama, of the history of the drama, of what a play really should be in any form, in any medium. And I'm grateful for having known him as I did.
Okay, well, let's talk about your own writing. How did you get into television?
I got into television through the job at Theatre Arts, which I'd had a story published in college. And because of that, I got hired by Harper's Bazaar to do fashion copy, which the day I was supposed to be fired, all my friends told me that I was going to be fired. I rushed into the managing editor and said, "I quit." And she was largely relieved, because I didn't know anything about fashion and cared less. But the theater, that was different. And I got the job on Theatre Arts by calling a very good screenwriter of some renown in Hollywood now, Lorenzo Semple. And I saw him on the masthead, and I wrote him a letter and said, "Dear Lorenzo, if you're the Lorenzo Semple who used to be called Bunny, I'm the Ellen Violett who used to be called Pucky, and I'm looking for a job." And so he had me come in, and Sally Deutsch, who was our managing editor, gave me a job. Out of that, I met Al McCleary, who was at Fordham. He was running the theater at Fordham, off-Broadway, to put it mildly. I mean, most of the early producer-directors on television came from the campuses, a lot of them. Fredco did too. And McCleary, because I'd edited incomprehensible, some copy he'd done for us, a piece, asked me to, he said, "I've got and also I dramatized a play for him up there. He asked me, he said, "I've got a sustaining show, summer show on NBC. And I don't know what lights are going to do on sets, so I don't want any sets. I want faces. I want to use faces as background. I know how to light faces. And I want the kind of story, terribly strong. And he said, I want it to be anti-fascist, which was an interesting thing to say right in the middle of blacklisting. But I was eager to please him in that way. And I'd read this story, and I told him about it and showed it to him. And he leapt at it. It was called Shirley Jackson, The Lottery. And it's about a ritual stoning. And it seems to be about everybody ganging up on one person because of superstition and prejudice and whatnot. I took it 24 hours ahead in order to make it real, so that you'd meet real people who are under this pressure without saying what the pressure was. And he directed it very brilliantly, and what he called the cameo technique. And it did make a considerable splash. According to Time magazine, it was the most exciting play ever seen on U.S. television, which, since this was 1950, television was just there. Nobody was aiming at television. It was just there. And it was starting, and we were starting, and it was sort of like summer stock used to be for actors. They wanted you because they needed to fill the time. They knew you one way or another, and if you were a dramatist or had any idea of being one, it was the place to go, and you were using it as a stepping stone, you thought. And I had no idea it would be as big a part of my life as it was.
What changes did you make to Shirley Jackson's story when you wrote it?
I took it 24 hours ahead. The brilliance of her story is that it opens on a sunny day. These people are washing their dishes, and these same women are then going to go and draw lots with their husbands. Then if the family that draws the black thing will draw again, and one member of the family is the loser, and it happens to be the woman that you first see washing dishes, and suddenly she is in the middle of the circle, and one of the lines was, Mrs. So-and-so picked up a rock that was so big she had to use both hands. And that so appalled me. I remember shutting the New Yorker. But I thought, that's what he wants. He wants small town faces, he wants violence, and he wants anti-that. And so anyway, I did it, and then he got one from Martha Miller, which was Sweller. So they did that, but it flopped. And then mine went to Lights Out. I did it on spec. And somebody at Lights Out suggested to me that I put Jesus in it in some way. And he said, nothing obvious, maybe like just a cross in the background. So I just went back to theater arts and said, like, I don't know, they're crazy, and just didn't do anything. And then, of course, everything turned around again, and McCleary called up in a great lash-up, and he needed extra scenes, and Barbara Schultz played the ingenue. And by taking it at 24 hours ahead, I introduce you to people under strain. You don't know what the strain is. It's as if there was a lynching going to be happening, but you don't call it that. And a stranger comes through town, which is a line in the story, who says they've done away with it in his town. And so there's a moment when they could fight it and don't, that kind of thing. It was kind of fairly elementary, but McCleary did a fabulous overhead shot for the stoning. He used no props, fortunately. And so that this whole thing was shot from above, but you knew it was really scary. People called the station just the way they'd called the Orson Welles thing about when he did the thing about on the radio. And they got I don't know how many letters. And then I did it as a stage place for a touring company.
Did Shirley Jackson have a reaction to your editing?
Yes, she did. She said, I think they did a great job, but it's not my story. Also, she got mad at me because of the stage version, and then she got some man who'd done another version in '53, and there was a contretemps with them, and it should have been my Amal on the Night Visitor. I could have sold that thing in England, and I could have sold it wherever television went. But she blocked that for her lifetime. Now it's in the anthologies, and but it's too late.
What was it like seeing your words broadcast staged live for the first time?
At Barnard.
So for the lottery, were you there in the studio, in the control room for the broadcast?
Yeah, I was there. Oh, was I there? The second year, they got a sponsor, and then they got a Story in Life, which they actually mentioned me, which was nice. And in the second year, I was an extra because it was boring standing around, and everybody was the same except that they shopped in Maggie Swope, Margaret Swope, as the woman that got stoned, because the other woman didn't have a name. And
when you say the second year, you mean it was restaged live again?
It was restaged in 1951, exactly the same studio, by McCleary, exactly the same cast with that one exception, and I had to do something with the script because there were commercials, beginning and end commercials.
And so you were an extra? What was that like? Was it
funny? Except during the stoning it wasn't so funny, and Barbara Schultz, who was a character in the thing, and I, when we were meant to be doing the stoning, we both ran out around the camera and escaped. And at one point, in a rehearsal, they tore the back of Maggie Swope's dress off by mistake. People got very excited under those circumstances, and you can see what mob ruled can do, I guess.
What can you say about Albert McCleary? He was kind of an important figure early on in television.
Strange guy, very strange. He wanted me to meet him at the Armory for our conversations because he said it was so much cleaner there than showbiz. I mean, very bizarre remark, I thought. And but anthologies, and I was launched and he was launched. So it worked. I never worked with him again. He had something called the Matinee Theater, which he did on the coast. And I made a feeble effort there, but some kind of development deal. I can't even remember what happened, but it didn't work.
Okay. So the lottery established you. Did it lead to other TV work?
Yeah, it did the suspense. Because it was exciting, because the word exciting had been used, because the reviews were so, and the word of mouth, I was hired frequently to do suspense. But the very bad shows, and one of them was really appalling, and Jack Gould said that everybody connected with it should grow up. I remember that. And fortunately, they had a mistake in it, and they said I was in the cast, and somebody else had written it. I was very pleased.
Was that Breakdown?
Yeah. That one, I had the director of that. Directors were nemesis for me. I didn't realize how much of it had to do with being a woman because it just didn't occur to me. But this guy was a nemesis for everybody. And he, it was about a man who got an automobile accident. And as a result of the automobile accident, he he's a mean, horrible man, and, man of iron in his company, and everybody hates him. He breaks his neck in such a way that he's taken for dead. It really was a tasteful little number. And so he ends up on a slab in the morgue, and the man that he's been dressing down comes in to identify him, and a tear comes out from under his eyelid. This was the story. I didn't do much with the story, I just put it there. And then the man realizes he's really alive, and then he is brought back into being. Well, right before the show went on, they told me, you've got to change it, you've got to change it, the man directed it, because it's an airplane, it's got to be an airplane accident, because Autolights are our sponsor.
What was Autolite?
Autolite had something to do with automobiles. You have got me. That was always true, and why we had to do that, I don't know.
And who was that director?
Fortunately, I've forgotten, but he was okay.
And you said that it was reported that you were a performer in Breakdown?
I've seen somebody showed me a clipping which said I was.
But you weren't?
Of course not.
Were you aware that show later became an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents that he directed?
No. Did it?
Breakdown.
The worst thing I've ever seen. I can't imagine Alfred Hitchcock. It was a terrible show. Donald Briggs was in it. Not a good show, I promise you.
After Suspense, one of the shows you worked for a great deal was Omnibus.
Oh, well, that's a very different cup of tea.
Describe Omnibus for us. That was an unusual show. What was...
Omnibus, my connection with Omnibus was a wonderful man called Paul Feige, who was a very excitable, very untelevision type. And he would have wonderful ideas, and he tried to get this very fragile story done, and he'd had 4 men try to do it, and they all made caricatures of it. And finally, Flora Roberts, who was then my agent, got me to do it. And it was a Pamela Francow story called The Duchess and the Smugs. And that really became, I think I got tied into television emotionally then in a way I hadn't been. Susie Strasberg played the little girl, and her parents were Paula and Lee Strasberg, who were omnipresent in the studio and very much stage father and mother. And a wonderful woman called Lily Darvas, who'd been married to Mola, played the Duchess. And she was enormously sophisticated and good. And it was very classy, and very good stage director John Stix did the actors, and a very good camera director did that. They split the duty, which was very rare. This is all live, you see. And that show, I'm still proud of that show.
What was that story about?
About a little girl falling in love with people that are opposite. She's a child of Bohemians. And the Bohemian family, the father and the so on, are, he's a poet, and he was in the resistance, it's post-war, in the south of France, and there's a villa, and he has a hotel, and he's very bad at business, and if he doesn't like people, he won't take them in the hotel. And one of the people he does like is this very outre old duchess who gambles and used to have a lot of lovers and was also in the resistance. And the little girl doesn't like the way everything is at the hotel. She doesn't like being the Bohemian side of things. And next door is this English family that the father calls the Smugs, who've rented a villa. And she falls in love with that family because they do everything at the same time every day. They have proper exercises and meal times, and they're all beautiful, and they're English. And she knows just enough about English people to know that her French stepmother she shouldn't be French, and her own mother was an American who died. It's hard to tell you. It was the caliber. It was the texture of the story, the wit, the charm. I read it. I went downstairs and where Omnibus was, whatever that building was, and sat in a drugstore and read it was in Harper Magazine, and I just thought, oh, I've got to do this. And I did a 40-minute treatment, and Feige called up and said, all right, you can do it. And after that, I did very, very interesting, challenging things for them. I escaped suspense, and I became, I guess, if you had a really impossible adaptation, call me. That's what my specialty became. I did Thornton Wilder's Skin of Our Teeth. I did Gertrude Stein's Brucey and Willie. I mean, Salome. All for different people, but
Did you have, do you think there was a secret or a particular skill to adapting
yes.
that kind of material? What was it?
One, if it's faithful, some of mine haven't been. If it's faithful, the one for Shirley Jackson wasn't. It was an attempt to make the effect happen dramatically. But if you're faithful and there's a strong style, then you have to have a good ear. And you have to be able to write in the manner of, to get where that playwright was or that writer and try to get inside those characters. And if they're going to speak your lines too, make the match, make them rise to the occasion. If you're going to change it, if you're going to change the intent of the original writer, which I did on the very last show I ever did, which was Gavin Lambert's slide area. That was a Joan Crawford attack, and we'd already had Mommy Dearest, and I didn't want to do that. And this was for PBS, 40 years later. So I said, I'll do it if I can make her vulnerable. If it's just Joan Crawford walking all over the man who directed Rebel Without a Cause in fiction, then I don't want to do it. But if I can make it a rising young television guy coming out to Hollywood in the 50s, as they did, like Sidney Lumet, and trying to get in the movies, and this great movie star who wants to do just what she did, but she's slipping. And she's getting very frightened about her looks, frightened about her age. Then I want to do it. And this was not in the story. And they agreed. Then everybody tried to take it back, but in PBS you can't.
So you developed an instinct?
They can't. As the guy said when he was working for Omnibus, John Beale, they said, please take off your toupee. This was in The Duchess and the Smugs. And he said, not for this money.
Well,
I said the same by the time I was old.
Before we discuss the other omnibus scripts you did, can you tell us a little bit about the format of that show? It wasn't a typical dramatic anthology.
Omnibus? Well, for instance, right before The Duchess and the Smugs, the Philadelphia traffic controller did a whole display with the traffic on a table, all in the same studio, all with the same lights. Everybody rushing around trying to get to the right set at the right time. And his traffic thing screwed up. So it didn't help. It didn't get us into a very, very poetic piece as happily as we could have. But it was just, it was just one of those agonizing things while you were watching it.
So your dramatic pieces would be mixed in with documentary type reports?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you'd have the whole hour and a half. I think Dear Brutus did, I think Salome did, but mostly not, mostly not. And Uncle Tom's Cabin, they called me at the last minute and said, we're not getting 49, we're not getting 59 minutes, we're getting 49, a big difference. And that cut helped.
The second omnibus you did was Brucey and Willie?
Yeah.
What was that?
That's Gertrude Stein. And I was a company playwright of the touring players, and we'd done it out on the road. And we came in and did an audition for Paul. By that time, I had a good relationship with him, and he liked it, and John Stix redirected it, and they used the company except for one actor. And then I had to spend most of the time running around after Alistair Cook saying, please remember to say the touring players, please remember to say, because he would not work with paper. He would not. So you were really at his mercy. If he said your name, you got a credit. It was good and all, but that was a pain.
Alistair Cook being the host of Omnibus. What else do you remember about him?
My watch. Alistair would be droning on, and I'd have cut something to 49 minutes, you know. I mean, it was live. These things are live, and this man's ad-libbing. He was great. But I think of him as coasting along the top of things. Not one of the guys who gets under the thing.
You mentioned adapting Uncle Tom's Cabin for Omnibus.
Yep.
What were the challenges of turning that novel into?
Well, the challenge was just saying the word Uncle Tom. It was, again, in the 50s, and it was a pejorative term. I was told by friends that all the black actors were going to meet in Harlem, and really considerable people like Frederick O'Neill and Rosetta Lenoir, and they were not pleased, and obviously none of them wanted to play the part, because I don't know who the guy was who played it. But Tyne Daly's father played the good, alleged good owner, and what I did was to go back to the book, start with Harriet Beecher Stowe, end with her. And I tried to show at its most ideal, under a civilized, brilliant man who happened to drink a bit, and unfortunately fought in a duel and hadn't freed anybody and died. So then you get sold to Simon Legree, worst case. But Simon Legree is a psychopath. You don't need that to show you slavery's wrong. That's why that book is hated. And you don't need the black guy to be a saint. You just need him to be somebody who is in this position. And what I tried to do was to go back to her theme, which was as bad as it is for the slave. It's as corroding, terrible for the master, and comes out of the mouth of this very sophisticated white man in New Orleans, and where my own family had come from, where the Violetts came from. So what I wanted to do was to make it not palatable, but human. And in the meantime, the Daughters of the Confederacy were threatening to go to black. That was their phrase. Nobody went anywhere, and Rosetta Lenoir sent me a marvelous card, which I wanted to have to show you, but I forgot. It said, "Thank you for your divine adaptation."
After that, you did Salome for Omnibus?
Oh, yeah. Don't let's go on. But that was just a show. I mean, they used Eartha Kitt, which was good, but the direction got all mixed up, and at one point, the Sordak himself said to me, he ran the whole thing, you can't say, "I kiss thy mouth, Yakanan," which goes, I mean, Salome says it about 15,000 times. You have to, because the American public won't know what that means, you have to say, "I kiss thy lips, John." And I said, "No, I don't, because it doesn't scan." And somehow I think we got Jonathan out of that. Mouth did become lips.
And the final Omnibus, I think, was Dear Brutus.
Yeah. Let's move.
Okay. Is there anything you can say about Robert Sodick, the executive producer of Omnibus?
When I said let's move, what I really meant was my feelings about television are really deeper than anything we're talking about now. This was live television and terribly challenging because it was so scary. For instance, on Dear Brutus, Alistair Cook said to me, you know, I'm going to read the stage directions, the Barry stage directions, right from the script, because of course they're so famous, they are. But the stage directions he was reading, well, he wouldn't make a cut I was asking him to make, were in fact written by me in the style of. I mean, it isn't impossible. And anyway, Helen Hayes was in that, and I'd already done Skin of Our Teeth when she'd really been very mad at all of us because we were television people, and now she'd gotten over it. So now she loved me. And she was very good at that. She could have been wonderful, but they put her in a costume that looked exactly like the set, so that got lost. And again, Susie Strasberg and all the Strasbergs, and so on.
Was every live show you did a sort of nerve-wracking experience like that?
If you stuck with it.
I mean,
If,
the ones you were there
even the Duchess and the Smugs, at one point, two people make an exit, and they're supposed to be going off together, and they get to the door, and they go in two different directions, on camera, finished, can't do anything about it. And the late lamented Nina Foch in Rebecca, she played Mrs. Danvers in Rebecca. This was in the 60s, last live show. And at the number one, she earned my eternal love by bringing the novel to the reading and saying, in case I hadn't read it, because this was a Selznick series and we were meant to be dramatizing the movie scripts. I said I had. Anyway, she was the one plot place where everybody had to rip through a lot of stuff, and then Maxim de Winter goes to the stairs, which was James Mason, who was perfect, and says, Mrs. Danvers, and she appears at the top of the stairs live on camera and says, did someone ring for me? And I was sitting in the control room saying, no, you, somebody called you. There is no ringing in this scene. Just a little thing. But friends of mine told me they got under the desk. But Joan Hackett was in that. She was wonderful. But she couldn't learn the lines.
What line, was there a particular line or anything that she had a problem with?
Yeah, she leaves the space. She died very young. She was a wonderful actress. But she couldn't, she must have, I don't know if it was dyslexia or what, she couldn't nail a line. And when you're doing something live, was the huge, big studio out in Brooklyn, you have to be on time. I mean, you can't leave a big hunk of space on the live scene and then have somebody come on in a film scene and get burned, which with Manderley, which Falk did. So it was, somebody went out to Queens and just sat with her and made her listen and learn it. And at the voiceover, which is quite famous from the movie, last night, and the book, last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. She gets up there and she says, last night I dreamt I went again to Manderley. Wrong. And so, but that was in a studio, so we could stop it. That happened to Catherine Cornell on the Barretts of Wimpole Street. She had already recorded How Do I Love Thee to open it. She must have done the Barretts of Wimpole Street 180,000 times around the country. And she and Guthrie McClintock was the director, producer, everything. I was billed as the associate to the consultant to the director. I just did fade in, fade out, and whatever. And but I did the script, and it opened with "How Do I Love Thee," so they're playing the record that she'd already recorded, and she says, "How did I love thee? Let me but count the ways." And then on it went, and I'm standing there. I'm thinking, if I tell Guthrie McClintock this, he's going to make me go get the book. Because he won't believe it. He won't believe that she could possibly be wrong and I could be wrong, right, and I don't have the book. I don't have the Portuguese sonnets right on me. And so finally, Gertrude Macy was standing behind me with Nancy Hamilton, and they were mumbling. And one of them said, "I think that's wrong." And the other one said, "Couldn't be." And I turned around and said, 1, it's wrong. 2, if I tell Guthrie, I'll have to go get the book, and we don't have time. And 3, if you don't fix it, every school teacher in America will write you a letter tomorrow morning. So should they fix it? But things like that happen. I mean, is it scary? Yes, it's scary.
Now, what was the Barrett's of Wimpole Street? That was a special, or?
Yeah. Specials happened all the time. I mean, they'd get somebody. I think Fred had something to do with that. I don't know. I can't remember. Fred Coe.
Yeah. Well, tell me about Fred Coe. And he was one of the big producers in live television.
Well, he was a friend. I loved him. He never used me on Philco. And like Reggie Rose wouldn't use me on The Defenders, you remember, until somebody got around him. And he had a bevy of young guys that he used that were, he called them all Pappy. And he was their Pappy. It was sort of a reverse thing. But as a young writer, I was taken through NBC on a tour. First time I ever saw Fred. And he was then directing some awful thing called Forward Theater. And as we toured, we brought into this studio, and there was this man screaming at the top of his lungs. I've never, every expletive you ever heard. There was an actor up on something that looked like a half moon, and all the writers trooped in to watch this. And Fred Coe, it was Fred Coe losing his temper as a director. And that's the first time I ever saw him. And he had a temper that just blew. It didn't stop. He was a very temperamental man. But he gave the best notes as a producer in a control room of any producer I ever worked with. Unforgettably good. He was just brilliant. And that's something that he hadn't been with all along. He'd been out on the coast. He'd flown in late. Everything was late. And, but my memory of him is that he was like Paul Feig. He was worth it.
Also for Fred Coe, you did The Skin of Our Teeth, an adaptation.
That was what yeah.
When you did that, did you meet Thornton Wilder?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
We met at the Century Club. And I was there, and Fred Coe, not Fred, of course, but Bill Nichols, who I was supposed to marry and didn't, was sitting beside Fred Coe, and I mean, with Thornton Wilder, and very nervous that I was going to say or do the wrong thing. And Thornton Wilder was talking to us about the problem of Sabina on camera, who is, the 6 o'clock, the master's not home yet, maid, who's like a symbol, who keeps breaking to the audience. I don't know what this, like Tallulah Bankhead did it, I don't know what this play's all about, darling, it doesn't make any sense to me, that kind of thing. And then goes back into the script. Well, it's a problem because at the end of the first act, she's yelling at the audience, "Bring up the chairs, burn the chairs, save the human race," because fire and flood and all that. And the audience does bring up chairs. I mean, somebody does in the theater, but you can't do that on the tube. So there was a big concern. And Mr. Wilder said, "I think she should break to the grips. She should just talk to the grips, to the camera people." And I said, I had a vision of that. And I said, you know, comedians, you clearly didn't know much about TV. On TV, break all the time to the audience. They'll say, you know, that wasn't my line, or they'll make cracks at each other that are supposedly ad libs. And so then he was very nice about that. He agreed. And at another point, he couldn't be here for the show, and everybody's saying, "Thank God," and all saying, "Oh, we're so sorry." And he said, "At my back," and I'd already quoted the play to him several times because the touring players had done it and knew it by heart. And he said, "At my back, I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near," like a little professor with his feet not quite touching. And I'd given him the lines from his own play. And then he turned to me and said, he'd said to me when I did it A+. So he looked at me and he said, "I thought, it's Marvel or it's Meredith, but I'm not about to guess." Because I said, "I don't know everybody's work as well as I do yours, Mr. Wilder." And he said, A-. He's like that. He was professorial.
The Skin of Our Teeth had an amazing cast. Helen Hayes, George Abbott, Mary Martin, Don Murray. What can you tell us about
And Mary Martin's daughter,
okay.
whose name eludes me. But Heller, that was her name. They gave her that name because it was apparently of difficult delivery. And, well, Helen Hayes, they were all on stage. And Vinnie Donahue, who I'd already worked with, they were going to go straight from the stage when they closed to that huge studio in Brooklyn, enormous. And so when that was to happen, I had to go see the play, cut the play right. So, and they didn't even have time for a reading. They had 1 week of rehearsal with no reading. So I really had to be right about the time. And there's George Abbott, who knows everything about cutting, coming over and saying, "Ooh." And so Helen Hayes got it into her head that we were going to cut her part and do this as an extravaganza magically in 1 week for Mary Martin, which was far from my thoughts. And when she saw the script and she realized that we did, in fact, know what we were doing, and it was okay. And she even stood up for me when Florence Reed bitched about being in a fortune teller's booth. It's the only way she could tell she was a fortune teller. How's the American public supposed to know that? And she was extremely nice to me on Dear Brutus as a result. "Oh, I saw your name. I knew we were all right." So I certainly didn't know we were all right to begin with. She was a wonderful actress, but she kept playing herself. Or so Lee Strasberg told me.
Vincent Donahue directed both of those Fred Koch shows, Skin of Our Teeth and Barracks of Wimpole Street. Do you remember, what can you tell me about Vince Donahue?
Vinny?
Yeah.
Loved him. You could work with him. He didn't pull out of rank. He wasn't boring. And he got me into, he foisted me on McClintock and Cornell. I liked Cornell a lot. She was nice, and she was wonderful. Could have had a movie career because she did it all close-ups. But Vinny had a terrific career. He died very young, and my memory of him is strictly television, that he never made the jump, which everybody was trying to make so desperately. 2 movies or whatever.
And how exactly was Guthrie McClintock involved with that TV version?
Was he involved? He ran it. She did nothing without him.
Catherine Cornell?
Yes. He changed a lot. I mean, he was difficult. He didn't dig me, and I didn't dig him.
Is that why you were credited only as the consultant to the
I don't know how that happened because I wasn't paying any attention. A failure of agenting and union and everything else, I guess.
But you weren't credited as the writer of that show.
I should have been, because I typed it out and stuck the cuts in.
I just want to ask about a couple of other live shows that you did during that period. You did an adaptation of Laburnum Grove for the U.S. Steel Hour.
Oh my God, yes. Which they cleverly called Counterfeit, in case, which was all about a bank employee who made counterfeited money. So the title blew it.
And Boris Karloff was in that?
Yeah. And I think a rather good actress, I can't remember. But mostly I remember Lawrence Langner, who was the Theatre Guild, and they really ruled both that show and the Theatre Guild itself. And they had a reading at the Theatre Guild, and I had, in the play, the people used the tube, because it was all in London. And he said, I always wonder, perhaps we should change that to, I said, you want to say underground? And he said, well, I don't forget what we said in the end. It's like saying what you're going to say for the N word in Uncle Tom's Cabin. But he said, I always wonder what the farmer in Montana will think. Well, I can tell you what he'd think about that.
What did you use for the N word?
I don't. Oh, black. Before black was beautiful. And that was the suggestion of the guy who played Uncle Tom. Everybody stood around nervously and asked him what we should do.
Do you remember a live situation comedy called Jamie? Called Heart of a Clown for Center Stage? Oh,
that was an original. And it was written for Nancy Walker, and that one I put my heart in. And she went off to do Gentlemen Prefer Brunetic Clown. And Lily Darvas was playing the head of the aerialists, and we'd made great friends on The Duchess and the Smugs. And after the first reading, she said, let's go down to have coffee. And I said, fine. We went down to have coffee, and she said, they tell me that the first reading you can tell. If the first